Hello, this is JumboCommander back with another god from Hour of Devastation. Today we have a deck tech for the Scorpion God. The Scorpion God is 3 black-red for a 6/5 legendary god that says, whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, draw a card. It also has an activated ability, 1 black-red, put a -1/-1 counter on another target creature. Then, when the Scorpion God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. Amonkhet block hasn't just given us some great -1/-1 counter cards, they've given us an entire strategy, with Hapatra and the Scorpion God letting us really explore -1/-1 counters in commander decks. The Scorpion God is going to be a nightmare for other creature decks. Being able to throw around a -1/-1 counter is very powerful in combat, but it's that draw ability that draws everyone closer to playing the Scorpion God. So I imagine a deck full of value where we snipe our opponent's creatures and then draw cards whenever we do. This is the Scorpion God. Let's be honest, creatures don't really stand a chance against this deck. If we look at cards like Grim Affliction or Skin Render, they're just examples of how many opportunities we have to kill our opponent's creatures. The activated ability on the Scorpion God also makes combat really difficult. Grim Affliction also has the magical word proliferate, which we'll pay attention to. The activated ability on the Scorpion God can get a little bit expensive, so being able to proliferate on multiple creatures can save us a lot of mana. Not to mention our ability to spread -1/-1 counters. Blowfly Infestation says, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, if it had a -1/-1 counter on it, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And if you have your god in play, that also means you're drawing a card. So you're drawing a card and spreading the counters. And if that creature dies, you can spread it again and again and again. Just imagine if your opponent has an army of 1/1 elves or goblins. You can just blowfly infestation their entire army to death. Crumbling Ashes is there to take care of bigger creatures. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. So we can see a lot of creatures dying, but it's also hard for them to enter into combat. Corrosive Mentor gives all your black creatures Wither, making combat really difficult for your opponent, not to mention a card like Necroskitter. Whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may return that card to the battlefield under your control. Necroskitter is a house with the Scorpion God because you're going to be killing stuff with -1/-1 counters all the time. And with a Necroskitter, you'll just get those creatures to your side of the battlefield. There's another card that makes combat super difficult for your opponent, Kolrath Knight. Creatures your opponent control with counters on them can't attack or block. So now your -1/-1 counters are just straight up pacifisms for all of your opponent's creatures. Now this has me thinking of a strategy that revolves around creature combat. Now I know that's not something new and unique for Rakdos, but being able to kill a lot of creatures means that it leaves your creatures free for combat. So you could take an angle where you focus on some of these great controlling, creature killing -1/-1 strategies, and then also maybe add some other creatures that are just super dangerous. How about Master of Cruelties, which can just knock your opponent down to 1? Or other creatures that might not be as impactful, but still really dangerous in creature combat, like Grenzo's Ruffians or Banshee of the Dread Choir. And there's a lot of creatures in Rakdos that you can find that deal really well with combat. And so if you build a shell that deals with creatures, you can have a support cast of creatures that attack. And if we're going into an attacking strategy, I might suggest a few other cards like Everlasting Torment and Stigma Lasher. Both of these perform very well in -1/-1 counter strategies, but also in heavy combat strategies. Everlasting Torment reads players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented. That's the kind of thing we want when we're dealing a lot of combat damage. We're not going to go infinite, we're just going to turn our creature sideways, so gaining life is really bad for us. But then also, all damage is dealt as though its source had Wither. Similarly, Stigma Lasher has Wither and says if it deals damage to a player, that player can't gain life for the rest of the game. So both of these can support the aggro strategy, but also this sort of wither -1/-1 strategy. And if we're going to be attacking a lot, I have another category that can open up a lot of options for this deck. And that's just swarming your opponent. A no-brainer for this deck is Nest of Scarabs. Whenever you put one or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, create that many 1/1 black insect creature tokens. So as we're removing our opponent's creatures, we're getting tons of insects. And also, we can cash those insects in for cards for just 3 mana and our commander. In fact, we're so good at placing -1/-1 counters that we might just accidentally draw our entire deck. Nest of Scarabs says whenever we put a -1/-1 counter, we make insects. Blowfly Infestation says whenever something dies from a -1/-1 counter, we gotta put another counter on another target creature. So if we just keep killing things with -1/-1 counters, we keep making insects and we keep having to place counters. We throw our commander into the mix and suddenly we draw every time something dies with that -1/-1 counter, and we're just going through our entire deck. Now, we can get out of this loop by putting the -1/-1 counter on a different creature that doesn't die, and we will have that available because we will have the Scorpion God on the battlefield. But I think it'd be pretty funny if we just accidentally decked ourselves and lost the game. That's the kind of loss that I can really get behind. There are other token creators that help us with this swarm strategy, like Rite of the Raging Storm. This encourages our opponents to attack each other, lower everyone's life total, but we can kill their elemental whenever we want. So if we don't like who they're attacking, we can be political and put a -1/-1 counter on their elemental, drawing us a card. Also, we can let them attack and then kill the elemental at the end of their main phase, and then we get damage to an opponent that's not us and a card out of it. In fact, now I'm thinking of all of the 1/1 creatures that we can create that both attack our opponents really well, but then also draw us cards. How about a card like Bitter Blossom, creating a fairy every turn, or Ophiomancer, giving us a snake that we can cash in for a card and then get another snake. Or go really wide with Edric Sarb, Master Breeder, and if we put too many Thrall creatures onto the battlefield, we can knock a few off with -1/-1 counters and change them in for cards. I'm getting excited about all this card draw I'm imagining. I'm just going to throw in right now Dusk Urchins, which synergizes with -1/-1 counters and draws us cards, and also Skull Clamp, which we can clamp onto any of these creatures and get our card draw on. Now I have a few corner case token producers. Ogre Slumlord will give you a rat whenever another non-token creature dies. We really like having 1/1s, and we do like killing our opponent's creatures. We can also go really wide with Plague of Vermin, a 7-mana sorcery that has everyone bid life and then get 1/1 rat creatures. And this kind of had me thinking, I wonder if we could go like Swarmyard Tribal, rat, insect, spider, or squirrel. There are too few rats out there in order to really make this work. And there really aren't any red cards that help represent this Swarmyard tribe. But I think if you stacked up some rats in here, you could kind of maybe go rat deck. You are going to notice a few rats that are very strong. And so you might think to yourself, maybe I can stretch the tribe a little bit. And this Scorpion God does feel like a Swarmyard general, because even though it's not an insect, it kind of or a spider, it feels like an insect or a spider. So I really hope that one of you kind of grabs onto this idea and says, yeah, I'm going to go like vermin tribal, and that would make me really excited. But if you were looking for the better deck, I would say go with Marrow-Gnar and then go rat tribal with a bunch of relentless rats. It's also not a very strong strategy. Maybe we'll get some rat support in Commander 2017. Who knows? But back on track, I'm leaving rats behind, and I'm going to move on to a few more token producers, but some stranger ones in red. I'm not talking about the good ones like Handwear Battlements or Goblin Rabblemaster, Cranko Mob Boss. I'm talking about some of the strange ones like Varchild's War Riders, or Goblin Spymaster. So the War Riders are 1 and a red for a 3/4 trample rampage 1. They also have a downside. Cumulative upkeep, give one of your opponents a 1/1 survivor red creature token. In a multiplayer game, this is not always a downside. If you're trying to team up against a single player, you can politically give out these survivor tokens and kind of spread dissension among your opponents. Also, Goblin Spymaster does something similar. You can give people red goblin creature tokens, but you make all their creatures attack. And you are a deck that's great with creature combat. You have Wither. This Goblin Spymaster has First Strike, and you're going to be unleashing a lot of havoc on your opponents. Or you can just cash in those Goblin or Survivor tokens for cards with your commander. By the way, one other synergy I'd like to mention, Varchild's War Riders can put out a lot of creatures pretty fast, and that might be a liability to you. Unless you have a card like Rakdos Charm. Rakdos Charm is just a great inclusion for dealing with really dangerous graveyard-centered decks and problematic artifacts, but every so often you just get to kill someone with it, which makes it a really fun inclusion in any Rakdos deck. Now, you could go pretty deep with the token strategy, but you might want to tone it back a little bit and instead rely on the controlling aspects of the Scorpion God. That's why I think there's a lot of really strong board wipes out there. Board wipes don't always synergize with creature strategies, but sometimes it can, especially when your tokens are coming from enchantments, or if your big threats that you use in creature combat are single threats like Master of Cruelties rather than lots of little threats. So we could tone down creatures and really play up the controlling aspects with more board wipes. One of the best, which you might include even if you have a creature strategy, is Black Sun's Zenith. This will just oppress the battlefield with -1/-1 counters, and then let you draw crazy amounts of cards. This becomes a more flexible Decree of Pain when you have your commander out. Also, we can be more flexible with Incremental Blight, letting us pick off specific creatures we want to impact. There are also a few artifacts that let us have more control over our board wipes, like Contagion Clasp and Contagion Engine, spreading -1/-1 counters. There are also some creatures that do a great job at controlling the board. Midnight Banshee gives all non-black creatures a -1/-1 counter every single turn. Archfiend of Ifnir has a really low floor because you can cycle it away if it does nothing. But whenever you cycle or discard another card, you get a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. You can facilitate a little bit of cycling in this deck by having cycling lands, which I think are really, really good, but also some looting effects. Maybe a Wheel of Fortune that can combo with your Archfiend to wipe all of your opponent's boards. Carnifex Demon is also very strong, allowing you to spread -1/-1 counters while making the demon stronger. Now, sometimes a few -1/-1 counters just isn't enough. Sudden Spoiling shrinks down your opponent's creatures to make them easy to pick off with -1/-1 counters, but also, it's just a great answer to a lot of creature combo, crazy synergies, or situations that you really didn't expect. A split-second answer to any creature shenanigan is a really solid control card. And to go along with all these creature control strategies, Cauldron of Souls can give your creatures persist. And that's something you might actually be interested in, because if you have a bunch of random creatures and then they persist back with -1/-1 counters, those might be weaker creatures. But in my mind, I see every creature with a -1/-1 counter on it a card that I'm just waiting to draw. You know, this category kind of has me thinking that we don't have to be all-out aggro with our opponents. We don't have to swarm them or play any really powerful creatures. We can take a step back and use the creature removal and the card draw found in our commander to make a really strong control deck. Blood Moon can shut down tables like crazy. Vandal Blast can take care of artifacts. We know that black is great with creatures. Red certainly has some powerful hate cards, like Stranglehold. Your opponents can't search their libraries, they can't take extra turns. Now you think that that might not be a big deal, but it shuts down so many decks. If you're interested in a control strategy, I would suggest being very careful of one category, and that's enchantments. You really can't deal with enchantments at all. Red and black have horrible answers to them. Here are some of the only answers available. Chaos Warp can Chaos Warp it away. Steel Hellkite upon attack can explode it. Scour from Existence is really expensive, but it still hits an enchantment. And you could also have cards like Navinral's Disc or Boom Pile or Oblivion Stone take out the enchantments along with artifacts and creatures. But the problem is that you're really good at destroying artifacts, and Vandal Blast just destroys theirs. And you're also really good at destroying creatures. This might mean that adding another color could make your control deck stronger. But remember, just because you don't have the perfect combination of cards to make a control deck doesn't mean you can't have your deck skew more controlling. Have some of these powerful abilities that slow your opponent down and pick off their creatures as you gain card advantage. Now that sounds pretty cool. There's one final category that really needs some deeper explanation, and that's Infect. Because usually everyone freaks out about Infect when you have an Atrax on the battlefield. And yes, that can be very powerful too, but this is a different color combination that we're not used to playing with this strategy, and that gives us more options and more interesting synergies that we're not used to playing with. And many of the reasons why I explained this could be a good aggro strategy also makes this an excellent Infect strategy. We can control the board of creatures. That's exactly what Infect wants. We want to be able to get through with creature combat. We make sure that the creatures that we have are relevant. Well, yeah, when you only have to deal 10 Infect damage, every creature damage is very relevant. And Infect deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, which can draw us cards. And card advantage in Infect is very important because all of the creatures are small and puny. So let's take a look at what we need to add to make a solid Infect package in the Scorpion God. Well, to be honest, you could throw in almost any number of Infect creatures and just call it a deck. But Hand of Praetors has got to be one of the best, because it pumps all of your creatures and just hands out Infect counters. Also, Grafted Skeleton and Tainted Strike could go in this deck even if you don't go in a heavy Infect strategy. Grafted Skeleton makes any creature deal damage in -1/-1 counters to other creatures, and also be very, very threatening. And Tainted Strike can just turn a game around. One of my favorite plays is when your opponents are attacking each other, you just Tainted Strike the biggest creature that ended up going unblocked, and sometimes you just kill someone out of nowhere with another opponent's creature. It's a very fun and very satisfying play. Let's talk about a few of the really solid Infect creatures that we could include in this deck. Phyrexian Crusader, Phyrexian Juggernaut, Phyrexian Vatmother, Reaper of Shieldred, Septic Rats, there's some more rats by the way, and Skithiryx the Blight Dragon. All of these are strong and they basically just have Infect and can be really dangerous when your opponents have no defense against them. But almost an auto include in this deck, whether you're running a heavy Infect package or not, could be Plague Myrrh and Inkmoth Nexus. These are my favorites because they're useful even if you aren't trying to poison counter someone out. And if you become desperate, you can always activate the Inkmoth or just throw a Plague Myrrh in front of something, and you've now distributed a -1/-1 counter that you might be able to cash in for a card later. Infect creatures are kind of puny, so sometimes you do need to throw them in front of bigger creatures to shrink down your opponent's board. And that means you need the card advantage from your god to keep going, but also the card advantage off of other Infect creatures. Core Prowler, Corpse Cur, and Necropede are Infect creatures that give us incremental value when we play them. I also have a few sort of finisher cards. Fallen Ferromancer is a 1/1 Infect, but then you can pay 1 and a red and tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So that means that for 2, you can put a -1/-1 counter on a creature. Now, it does tap, so this is not as powerful as a Scorpion God, even though the activated ability is cheaper. You can also point this at your opponent's face and just give them a poison counter every single turn. Flesh Eater Imp is also very strong because it has evasion, so you can fly in to deal that poison damage. And you can cash in some of your other useless creatures, maybe those stupid 1/1 insects. Or you can cash in your own creatures that have -1/-1 counters on them to then draw some cards if they don't immediately die with that -1/-1 counter. Ichor Rats is also great because it gives everyone a poison counter, and that gives us a baseline to start proliferating. Now we're remembering all of those proliferate cards we had. The Contagion Engine, the Contagion Clasp, the Grim Affliction. We can build up this proliferate mechanic and also proliferate the poison counters on our opponents. I have one more form of reach. That's a sorcery, Caress of Phyrexia. 3 black for a sorcery that says target player draws 3 cards, loses 3 life, and gets 3 poison counters. Now, if you need some more card advantage in your life, you can point this at yourself, and it's not that bad. It's only 1 more mana than the traditional draw 3 cards, lose 3 life spells. And unless someone else is playing poison at the table or proliferate at the table, you don't care if you get 3 poison counters, but this has a hidden mode if you have plenty of card advantage. Point this at your opponent. Yes, they get to draw 3 cards, but more importantly, they take 3 poison counters. That's a third of their life, basically. Oh man, this is totally a finisher. You get in 7 poison and suddenly you're like, yeah, you get to draw 3 cards and lose the game. Okay, I've got one more big splashy play with poison counters, and that's Chandra's Ignition. So you play Chandra's Ignition on an infect creature, and that creature radiates its poison damage to each creature and each opponent. So this can be a board wipe with -1/-1 counters, letting us draw a ton of cards, or the damage is done by the creature, so this will just directly burn our opponents out with poison counters. And we got one better, Warstorm Surge. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So every single infect creature becomes a lightning bolt of infect. So if you play even a stupid 1/1 infect creature, boom, your opponent gets an infect counter. Or you take out a problematic creature. And that, Magic players, has been the Scorpion God. I'm excited about this because, again, they've been giving us commanders that have tons of different ways to build them. I can imagine several distinct strategies. You can go pretty wide with a lot of tokens and then cash them in to draw cards. You can control the board and attack with really threatening creatures. You can even go a little bit more controlling. We got some really strong board wipes that work well with the Scorpion God and controlling elements in Rakdos. Or we can move heavier into Infect and try to sort of Infect combo our opponents out as we clear the board of our enemies' creatures. I'm excited to see all of the different strategies you guys can brew up for this amazing commander. My name is JumboCommander, and I make commander content, and if you like this deck tech and want to see more, please subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at JumboCommander, an email, or just in the comments below. I'm excited to see all of the interesting strategies you guys are going to employ when building around the Scorpion God. All right, everyone, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.